I'm going to tell you first of all about Historians Without Borders. It was an initiative taken 10 years ago to establish an organization in Finland called Historians Without Borders. The idea behind Historians Without Borders had been incubating for quite a long time in my mind, based on the experience I have had both as a foreign minister and as a historian on how history, even very ancient history, continued to be and could be used, or rather abused, misused in fostering conflicts, preventing conflict resolution, creating enemy images, and so on. It was not necessarily historians themselves who were party to this kind of misuse. On the contrary, I would say that historians, the majority of our profession, is opposed to the misuse of their work. But it was mostly the media and politicians who can misuse the work of historians to these negative ends. So we asked, what could we do as historians to prevent the misuse of our work? And therefore we brought together Finnish historians on a very broad basis. We had today we have about 300 or more members in Finland in our national organization, including most of the history professors at our universities. To a meeting in May 20 years ago, and at the end of the meeting we agreed we had among our introductory speakers also Martti Ahtisaari, former president and who was the Nobel Peace Prize laureate for his work in peace mediation, and he also gave an expose of his experiences, how history had been could be misused to prevent conflict resolution. And as I mentioned, even very ancient history can do this. Anyone familiar with the Western Balkans will soon meet 1385, the Battle of Kosovo-Polia, which has been used even to foster enemy images and conflicts today. The Balkans is a region which, according to Winston Churchill, actually he's not the author of this quote, but this quote is attributed to him, is an area which produces more history than it can consume. And we as Historians Without Borders would like to help in consuming this history and putting it behind as a cause of conflicts. But even more ancient history can be used. In India today we know that Hindu Vatha is being used also with very ancient historical myths playing a role in that use. And of course, in the Middle East, between Israel and Palestine, we can go back several hundreds or thousands of years in history, which has been used in that conflict. So we decided to call together Historians Without Borders, and we had, of course, in mind that there are quite a few organizations in the world without borders, the most well-known one being, of course, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, but also Journalists Without Borders, and basketball players without borders, and even tax inspectors without borders. And I think that is a very necessary organization, as is indeed, I think, Historians Without Borders as well. So when we established the organization, we wanted immediately to make this into an international initiative. So we arranged a year later, 9 years ago, with the cooperation of the University of Helsinki, in Helsinki, a international conference. And at the end of the conference, the 300 participants from all over the world agreed on a declaration establishing the International Network of Historians Without Borders. And I quote from this declaration, meeting in Helsinki at this conference, we have agreed to continue working together in order to deepen general and comprehensive knowledge an understanding of history, promote open and free access to historical material and archives, encourage interactive dialogue between different views and interpretations of history to assist in the process of mutual understanding, support efforts to identify the abuse of history in fostering and sustaining conflicts, help diffuse conflicts and contribute to conflict resolution processes, to promote the teaching of history in the spirit of this declaration, and incorporate an understanding of the role of women and gender perspectives in efforts to build peace and resolve conflicts. Since we only had established a network, not an organization as yet, we also agreed that the Finnish organization would act as a secretariat for this international network. But the international network also had a coordinating committee on which I was chair, and with members from Carl Bildt, my former Swedish former foreign minister colleague, Margaret Macmillan, who was one of the keynote speakers at our conference, and Kristina Toomey from Australia, Sergei Suraliev from Russia, although unfortunately he has had to suspend his membership for well understandable reasons today. And we had Vasu Gounden from South Africa, from the Accord organization Accord, and Jan Behrens, my colleague from Germany, as members of this. And among the speakers at that conference we had not only, as I mentioned, Martti Ahtisaari and Margaret Macmillan, but also Romila Thapar from India, and Bernard Kouchner, the president of Médecins Sans Frontières, also was a speaker at the conference. And since then we have started working on several projects. We, as a Finnish NGO, we have, of course, continuously meetings, seminars, and other events, screenings, for example, in Finland, but also internationally to promote the aims of our network. And I have had the opportunity to meet with historians in about 30 countries, not only in Europe, but also in Asia, India, Vietnam, Japan, and in Africa. And I only recently returned again from a visit to South Africa and Namibia, where we had intensive discussions with historians in Pretoria and Windhoek, and also in North America. So, and everywhere the reception for our initiative has been overwhelmingly positive. And I would say that for any activities we find the financial resources to do, to work. We can mobilize intellectual resources. I would say that almost no one has ever said that they will not accept our invitation as a speaker, although we can even offer any compensation for their work, either in Finland or in international fora where we have had meetings. We have had meetings also internationally. This is about our fourth meeting, I think, in Germany. We have had several smaller meetings with historians. We have had a meeting at the Ebert Stiftung, where Jan was also present, on the topics that we have covered today. And we have had, for example, in South Africa, 7 years ago, an international conference on the writing of colonial history with historians from Southern Africa, but also some from Europe. And we have had also a conference with bringing together Belarusian historians and Nordic historians at the University of Lund, also funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers, and of course this History in Exile project, which we have been discussing and presenting today, is one of our main works. But we have also tried to and wanted to engage historians in dialogue to prevent the misuse of history in conflicts. And we have managed twice to bring together Ukrainian and Russian historians in Helsinki in a 2-day meetings. They did not agree on much, obviously, but they listened politely to each other's narratives, which is always the beginning for any kind of historical dialogue. You have to listen to the other side's narrative. You don't have to accept it, you can contest it, but you have to recognize it as such. And of course they did not agree on much, but they agreed on one thing, that they wanted us to continue facilitating this kind of dialogue also later. Unfortunately, due to the war, the Russian attack against Ukraine, this is no longer possible. But we have had indications from both sides, from Ukraine and Russia, that historians would like us to continue this dialogue once it becomes possible once more. But we know that today it's impossible to engage with historians in Russia. Even if they wanted to, they are very restrained by official policies, and it may be even dangerous to their freedom and health if they express any dissenting opinions about Mr. Putin's interpretation of history. So that's why we have reached out to Russian historians in diaspora, and with these kind of meetings that we have had here today and will continue to have tomorrow also in Berlin. We have also initiated a project to discuss and bring forth ideas on how the history of colonialism should be taught in Europe. We have applied for funding from the European Commission. We do not know what the result will be. We are waiting for the decision beginning of next year, but we have brought together also quite a number of international and national organizations as partners in this exercise, from Belgium, from Estonia, from Spain and other places. So we have quite a lot of networking working together, not only with historians as individuals, but also with other international organizations and national historical organizations. The teaching of colonialism, as also was, I think, shown by the previous discussion here today, is a delicate issue. And one fact that will change the way that we have managed to do that in European schools and educational institutions is the fact that a growing number of the pupils and students at our institutions will be coming from former colonies themselves. And obviously you cannot approach teaching colonialism in the same way that we have managed to do so, for better or worse, so far in Europe. So we are trying to also give an answer to that challenge if we get the funding for this project. Funding is also is a crucial issue for us. We are a very small organization, and Heta Hedman is our only permanent employee. We have a small office at the University of Helsinki, but I would say that our ambitions and ideas reach out much more than our funding can provide for the time being. But we have also studied the ways that in dialogue and conflict resolution has been done, and they dealt with history. We have had a conference on the role of historical truth and reconciliation commissions, which have been abounded around the world, not only in South Africa, which is the most best-known example, but also actually in Finland, where the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the treatment of the Sami minority has just concluded its work, and we will be engaged with them, with both the government and the Sami parliament, in analyzing and discussing the work and results of that commission's proposals. So there is a lot that we would like to do if we have the resources. We get a small grant. We have very good cooperation with our Ministry for Foreign Affairs. We retain our independence, of course, totally from any government, but we do get a small grant for them. and they have provided us with the means when we have had international meetings which have been hosted in many countries by our embassies. But most of our funding comes from private Finnish foundations which have funded our projects, and we are dependent on them. So we have at the moment, I think, about almost half a dozen applications in where we are waiting for the results and decisions which will enable us to continue our work. Of course, we have also ambitions internationally to make the network into an international organization. And therefore we have the experience that we have had meetings with the foundations, large international foundations in Sweden, here in Germany, in North America, and other places. And again, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Nobody has criticized what we are attempting to do. But unfortunately, none of these foundations have yet to come up with the money to fund our work. And one reason for that is that we are not an international organization. We are a Finnish NGO. And at least for Swedish foundations, it seems that the threshold for being able to fund Finnish organizations is quite high. And therefore, we would like to intensify efforts to make it possible to create Historians Without Borders into an international organization. To do that, we need, of course, a credible and sufficient number of national branches or other potential member organizations, at least a dozen to establish an international organization. And we have had talks on this with colleagues from Sweden, Estonia, from Spain, and other countries. And now we are engaged here in Germany with you also to see if there is sufficient interest and readiness in Germany to perhaps to establish a branch of Historians Without Borders. Of course, we have also concluded that the organization in any country does not necessarily have to have the Historians Without Borders in its name. As long as this organization works in the spirit and accepts the Historians Without Borders Declaration and its principles, we can also have other organizations. And we have had, I think, some promising examples of organizations which could be, if we find the means to get an international organization off the ground. After the Helsinki International Conference, we have worked on a second international conference. First came COVID in between, which of course restricted very much our international work. And the lack of funding is that we have indications from some universities in Europe, in Vienna or Salamanca, for example, that they would be willing to host an international conference and provide the facilities and the venues for such a conference. But we also need funding for this, and so far we have only some indications from the Open Society Foundation that they would be willing to participate in financing, but not as the sole funder for this conference. So any ideas and any proposals from you would be very welcome in this respect as well. I mentioned the dialogue that we have had with Ukrainian and Russian historians. We have had also nationally dialogues between members of the former Yugoslav republics diaspora in Finland. And we are also preparing a handbook on how to conduct historical dialogues between historians, which will be published both in Finnish and English once we have the funding ready. So, and we have also had contacts with historians engaged in countries engaged in conflicts elsewhere as well. For example, at the international conference we had in Helsinki, we had 7 workshops on different subjects, including one on Israel and Palestine, where we had both historians from Israel and Palestine working together at that workshop. So, and that is one of the challenges also facing any prospect for a just and viable solution to the Middle East Israel-Palestine crisis. And I would have to say that I was very encouraged by the Berlin Initiative, which was also very much supported by the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, which were under the leadership of Hiba Husseini from Palestine and Yossi Beili from Israel. They have managed to produce a plan, realistically plan for a two-state solution, even taking into account the facts on the ground, which are very dire today. But in their proposal for what they call a Holy Land Federation, they also had a passage several pages long describing, analyzing the history of the conflict. And this, I think, is very important because, as I mentioned already in the previous session, I think that for any peace agreement to be sustainable, you also have to openly and honestly address the history and the roots of the conflict in history, and before you are able to put it behind you. So we have quite a lot of tentacles, I would say, around the world, and working with historians in all over the world, and hope to also encourage you as German historians to look into the possibility of could you want to organize something which could be a partner for us as Historians Without Borders between our countries. Because while we are happy to host and act as the Secretariat for the International Network, we remain a national organization with very limited resources, and think that there is a dire need for bringing historians together over borders more than ever. If you look at all the conflicts ongoing in the world today, history plays a role in all of them, and historians should be mobilized to put behind the possibility of using history, abusing history for purposes which prevent conflict resolution. So I leave the floor to my colleague Jan Behrens to continue and comment on the German perspective.